everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Dr. Nasir Gore. I'm one of the clinical psychologists here with the Islamic Center. I work closely with the Muslim student body here, and I help provide them with a lot of therapeutic support and whatever I can do for the community as well. So today we're actually going to be doing a mental health check-in. And, I think looking at the larger list of programs that we have planned for this Ramadan, you might be wondering, why, how does this program really fit into the larger theme that we have here? How does this fit into that spirituality or that Ramadan spirit? And, I know Ramadan is a time of spiritual reflection, but our mental health is a central consideration during Ramadan. It's just as important as our physical health, as well as our spiritual well-being. And so mental health plays a pretty large role during Ramadan. There's a lot of ways in which it's beneficial for us, fasting and all the practices that we do during this month. Ramadan can also be a really difficult time for others when we're thinking about mental health. Others do find this as a time to struggle. And so we'll go into that, how is Ramadan good for us during this time for our mental well-being, as well as our spiritual well-being, as well as how, we can be an ally and support others who might be struggling during this time of year. And just some general self-care tips, how can we better take care of ourselves during this month too. And so, much of this month, it's based in gratitude and reflection, community. These are all factors that are a big role during Ramadan. I think these are words that we throw around a lot. These are things that we strive to do. And, we say that this is really important for our spiritual health, for us to better understand ourselves and improve our well-being. And that's absolutely true. Along with that, our mental well-being also really improves during this time. We find that during Ramadan, we end up empowering ourselves to take care of ourselves more in ways that we might not always immediately realize. I think the biggest benefit that we see in terms of, the mental health benefits from Ramadan is that, this is a holiday that really encourages us to slow down. When we fast, we really try to conserve our energy. We're fasting from sunrise to sunset, and we are also working, going to school, doing so many other things. We're trying to balance that with our regular everyday lives. And, our everyday lives as it is can be exhausting and tiring. And so Ramadan tells us to slow down. That fasting, we're trying to conserve our energy, where we actually make efforts, whether we always realize it or not, to cut down the things in our life that might be draining us of energy, things that might be stressing us out, or that, we cut out the extraneous things that we otherwise might have pursued in our day-to-day lives. We really try to be mindful of not overworking ourselves. I think a lot of us can sometimes be yes people. Setting boundaries can be really hard. We're saying yes to a lot of things, whether it's at school or at work. If it's at work, yes, I'll stay later to finish up this project or do that extra meeting, or, help someone else with what needs to be done because we have this deadline coming up. And then you find during Ramadan, we're like, hold on, I need to get to iftar, or I need to wake up early for suhoor. I need to reprioritize things a little bit because, there are things that I need to get done, but maybe there are a few things that can wait until tomorrow or a little bit later if I need to. Same thing for if you're a student, you might find that, there's so many things that you want to do at once, whether it's work, being involved in certain extracurriculars, or trying to, study for all these exams and really go above and beyond. And we try to do that, but we learn to reprioritize and reorganize ourselves so that we can do things a little bit more effectively and maybe break things down a little bit more. I've noticed that some people that I've met with, they tend to procrastinate a little bit less during Ramadan because there's almost this internal pressure for us to organize ourselves a little bit more too. So I think that's a good benefit in that sense. We really try not to overwork ourselves. We set boundaries in other parts of our lives where, that tend to be draining for us. And we actually, the time that we find instead, we try to indulge in other parts of our lives that we may end up neglecting usually. Things that maybe we sleep aside or say that maybe we'll do this later. I don't really have time now. I know it's important, but I'll get to it. And I think during this time, whether it's you wanting to practice your spirituality more, reading the Quran more, or even just, taking care of yourself more, or just slowing down and pursuing certain activities or hobbies that you might not always do. This is a time where we try to make more of an effort to make that happen for ourselves. And like I said, we really do try to reprioritize during this time of year. And I think as we do that, we try to step away from other activities that might be more of a time drain for us, right? Maybe we're doing a little bit less screen time. Maybe some of you find yourselves going down less of a hole when you're on TikTok because you're like, okay, maybe there's something else that I want to do instead right now because it's Ramadan. We use our time to be more, to spend more time with our friends and our family too. I think that becomes more of a priority for us too. We try to really seek out the community around us, whether it's friends, family, colleagues, fellow students, whatever it is for you. But we try to focus on that more. We try to make time for that. Whereas other times, maybe we're like, okay, we can push it aside. There's always later. But during Ramadan, it's more of an active effort on our part. And I think we focus on our spirituality more too. I think that's a lot of what Ramadan is about. And from a mental health perspective, that's also really beneficial for us. Taking that time out, practicing spirituality can be a part of self-care for some people. And so we prioritize that more. And, through all of that, all those other activities that we tend to prioritize more, like quality time with others, praying more, or just like I said, like stepping away from activities that we find draining, we're able to do that. And I find that during this time, individuals might feel a little bit less guilty about it too. And part of that is because, collectively as a whole, there's something really beautiful about all of us being in very similar situations and, getting each other's experiences. And I think, it's nice to know you're not the only one who's in this boat and trying to, balance all that you are and trying to make time for what you need to do. And then as we try to reprioritize the activities that we have in our lives, we find that we might be cutting back on some unhealthy behaviors too. And I think that's like a really another major benefit of Ramadan. We almost like can use this time as a reset for ourselves too, whether it's mentally or spiritually or any other way too. So, and like it gives us a time to think about what behaviors do we engage in that might be unhealthy. Do we engage in too much screen time? Are we smoking? Do we have a poor diet? What is it? What are those habits that we're trying to break out of? What is it that, maybe I don't want to indulge in as much during this month? And that active effort that we're doing to disconnect from those activities that we might find unhealthy or not as beneficial for us, it can be really empowering too. Being able to avoid those unhealthy behaviors, even if it's for a day or a few days or even the whole month, everyone's different. It's a good step forward towards resetting ourselves. Learning more patience, our ability to manage our impulses or our cravings or whatever it is, we're able to practice a little bit more self-control. And I think discipline is another virtue and factor that we try to practice during this month. And that's not only good for our physical and our spiritual health, but it can be good for your mental health too, because these activities that we might be indulging in normally during this time when we try to, disconnect from it, check out a little bit, try to be reset and try a new approach with a lot of things, we learn that, okay, maybe some of these activities were taking up too much time. Now I feel like I have more time to focus on other things. We learn how we feel without these activities in our lives, and that can feel really empowering too. And so, these are just some of the benefits. And I think one of the biggest ones, I think this is a time when we engage in prayer more often, right? And prayer in and of itself can be really great for your mental health. It's an incredibly mindful experience. And when I say mindful, mindfulness really refers to being present in the moment, in the here and now. Oftentimes we catch ourselves focusing on the past. What happened yesterday? What were the things that I did wrong or I couldn't get right? Or focusing on the future. What are the things that I have to get done tomorrow? What's stressing me out? What do I need to accomplish? Worrying about whether certain outcomes will turn out the way that we wanted them to be. And that can be really stressful. We always find ourselves either thinking back in the past or thinking too far in the future. And so being in the present is really important. because it allows us to disconnect from those stressful, anxiety-inducing, sometimes even depressive thoughts. And so, prayer, as I said, can be a really mindful experience. When we're praying, we're fully focused on it, on what we're saying, the movements that we're doing. It can be almost meditative in that way as well. We try to keep our minds centered on our du'as, our prayers, and we don't let our thoughts wander to those other realms, right? Those things that were stressing us out about last night, about all the things that we have on our to-do list for the next day or the next week or even the next few years. We were able to just be still and calm in that moment. And I think as we do prayer, even there's a lot of it helps us in like calming the noise or the chaos that we might feel in our minds sometimes. And so as we practice that more during Ramadan, you find that like you might feel a little bit less overwhelmed in that sense. And then I think another major aspect of Ramadan is that, it really encourages us to practice gratitude. And I think it really brings light to all of the things that, we truly have and we're blessed with in this life. It's human nature to make comparisons. We're always looking at the next person, the people who are above us, who have the things that we want. We see people who have things and we didn't realize that we wanted them until we see other people who have them. And it's like I said, it's human nature. It's things that we like naturally like tend to do. So Ramadan is a reminder of what we do have, right? And the privileges that we might typically take for granted in life. We sometimes we don't know what we have until we lose it. And so, and it puts a lot of things into perspective, whether it means appreciating a glass of water more so than we would have on a typical day, and after a long day of fasting, having some water can feel incredibly good. And you might not realize what that's like during other times of the year. To even like something greater. I think this year, especially compared to, the last 2 years with this pandemic, we've really learned how important and how special it can be to have a community. You look back at our Ramadan from the last 2 years, a lot of it was spent in isolation. We were in our homes, we were seeing limited people. And for us, this is a holiday where we're all gathering. We see our friends, we see our families, we share meals together. And for the last 2 years, we didn't really have that. And that really was a loss. And a lot of people struggled and it was hard. And we didn't realize just how special and important that was until it was gone. And now when we come back this year, alhamdulillah, we're gathered here, we're together, we have a lot more people here. And I think we value it so much more. I think the numbers that we've been seeing every day in terms of our turnout and people who come to our community really speaks to that. Because I think we realize what we lost. And so I think that's part of like what Ramadan teaches us too. Like these are just a few things, but you really do start to put things in perspective and think about what you do have that others might not, or what we may not have had in the past that we have now. And it's a time to be grateful, and there's a lot to be grateful for. And with that, it's important for us to reflect like what really matters here. And as we start to identify those things for ourselves, it can, help build our own self-worth. It can make us feel good about our circumstances. I think when someone's struggling with anxiety or depression or any other challenges related to their mental health, we tend to see things through a negative lens. It's hard not to when you feel like things aren't really going your way or as planned, and it can be hard to focus on the positive. But I think that's what Ramadan really brings into light. But even in those moments, sometimes practicing some daily gratitude can go a long way. And what I mean by that is maybe setting aside a few minutes for yourself and listing out 5 things that you're grateful for, 5 things that maybe you have now that even like maybe 10-year-old you wouldn't have imagined that you would have had. I think if you look back to your childhood version of yourself sometimes, they might be impressed with how much you accomplish because they might not have even in their wildest imaginations dreamed of some of those things. And so taking that moment to pause and reflect and just think back can really, like I said, empower us, help us in challenging some of those negative thoughts that we might be seeing coming into our minds and our headspace. And as I go into all of these positive benefits of Ramadan and how it's good for our mental health, I think we also need to draw recognition to individuals who might be struggling during this time of year. I've made a lot of statements. They don't really apply to everyone all the time. Some people do struggle, and it's hard. Those who have anxiety, depression, even eating disorders or bipolar disorder, this is a really difficult time of year for them. Part of it because they face the struggle of how can they observe Ramadan in a way that's appropriate for them and their mental and physical well-being. And you find that a lot of these individuals who might be struggling with mental health challenges or even taking medication for their mental health challenges, it's hard for them to fast or participate in the holiday as fully as they wanted to. And that experience and that internal struggle of trying to figure out, is fasting right for me and good for my health, given what I'm struggling with, even though it's a challenge that not anyone can externally see, is really hard for them to figure out. And I think it's important to think about these individuals because mental health challenges are more common than we realize. I think about 1 in 5 people struggle with a mental health disorder. So it's very possible that, a number of people in this room might be struggling as well too. And we don't always know. People don't want to disclose that, and that's okay. But for that reason, we need to be supportive and respectful and mindful of ourselves and the words we share, especially when it comes to this time of year. So like I mentioned, some individuals might be battling some struggles that are easily concealed, but that's contributing to a lot of feelings of isolation and loneliness. And I think just to put things into perspective, when I say that these individuals might be struggling with whether or not they should fast during Ramadan, for example, if you think about the disruption in sleep schedules that we have, sometimes we're running on less sleep during this time of year, or we're staying up really late and then waking up really early and we're sleeping in chunks or not at all. It's different for everyone. But what you find is that, for example, individuals who are struggling with depression or even bipolar disorder, that disruption in your sleep schedule can actually trigger a depressive episode or a manic episode, because sleep and that consistency and that routine is really important for maintaining one's mental health. And some of them may not have the capacity to do that. Another example is individuals with eating disorders. This is an especially difficult time of year for them. And I think the struggle of whether or not one should be fasting during that time, whether it's appropriate for their health, is a big question for those people. Because, as I said, as we know, we're taught that not fast if it's not appropriate for our health. If we're struggling with a health condition, if we shouldn't be doing it. And it's the same thing with individuals with an eating disorder and another mental health disorder. They have that same thing that comes into mind. And a person with an eating disorder, fasting during the day might almost reinforce an unhealthy relationship that they might have with food. Or someone who's recovering from an eating disorder might be risking relapse if they try to fast during this time and regress and go back on all the, the positive progress they may have made in their treatment and in their hard work. And then those who are on medications during this time, it can be really hard too on psychiatric medications, because those you have to take at certain times a day, multiple times a day sometimes, and you find that during Ramadan, we might not be as consistent with doing those things, and that can also be detrimental to one's mental health. So even just from that one perspective, when we're thinking about how individuals might be struggling during Ramadan, we really do have to be conscious and mindful, because it is a unique struggle. Not only must these people cope with their symptoms, but also how others might be perceiving them. Because I think it's a common question that we might ask each other during this time. Oh, how's your fasting going? Have you kept all your fasts so far? It's almost like a conversation starter. And it's a hard question to answer for a lot of these individuals who might not be fasting because of their struggles and the challenges that they're having. And it might be hard to even disclose it because they're worried about, the judgment that they might fear and how it might stigmatize them. Because you have this individual who outwardly seems able-bodied, seems healthy, but not be engaging in the fasting. And so then they worry, does that mean that others are questioning my faith? And am I practicing, or am I Muslim enough? And that in of itself can cause further feelings of isolation and stress. And so, when we're trying to think of how we can be mindful of that, specific factor as well, one thing that we can do is, for these individuals who feel like they're not participating in Ramadan in the way that they want to, or feel as spiritually connected to the community, there's a lot of other steps that we can follow to feel connected, to feel engaged. There's other ways to embrace the spirit of Ramadan almost. And that could include reading Quran, or, listening to Islamic lectures, or being consistent with your prayers, or even just being more mindful of your language, managing your anger, your emotions, finding other activities that can help you feel more spiritual, increasing the good deeds that you practice for others, or even like, cooking, or participating in an iftar. I think for everyone, it looks very different in how we want to feel connected, but these are just a few ideas of how to feel connected with your community if you feel like you can't have that, that mutual experience, that shared experience of fasting with others. And like I said, we may not know if someone isn't struggling with their mental health, or what they're going through. And so, as allies, it's important for us to be mindful of our language. Like I said, comments like, how's your fast going? Why aren't you fasting today? Why can't you fast? Like, that can be a little bit, it can make people feel a little bit defensive and feel very self-conscious. And, we may not realize it. Our intentions might not be there to make someone feel bad or anxious or any of that, but it may have that effect. So sometimes even reframing our questions can be helpful. Like, how's your Ramadan going? How have you grown during this time? What are your goals for this month? Rephrasing those questions can be really good ways to open up conversations. And then for those who are experiencing feelings of isolation and loneliness, whether it's for their mental health struggles or what's going on in their individual family situation, it can be a really hard time as well. And you find that during this time, it can be helpful to seek out our own community. I think communities really did redefined itself in the last few years as well. And I think, we feel more connected than ever with social media and all that, but sometimes, human interaction is what we're craving and what we need, and we need something physical, and it's really hard to have. Some people are still trying to, recover from this pandemic. We're not fully there yet. And so you find that, you can find community in a lot of different ways, whether it means that your friends and your family aren't nearby. It could mean that we go to the local masjid, or be involved in community activities, volunteering, find individuals with shared interests, and from there we can grow and build more connections. And so, there's a lot of different ways we could find that connection if we're seeking it. But it does require, taking a step on our part. And that first step can be really hard. It can feel a little scary, especially as we get older. It feels like, making friends as an adult can be really hard. But we kind of just have to take that breath and take that dive in and give it a shot and see what happens. And sometimes we got to just remind ourselves, what's the worst that could happen, right? Sometimes we need to question that if we're feeling anxious or apprehensive about taking that step. And you might find that the worst that could happen is that, the situation will worsen, and, is it that bad if the worst case scenario happens? And what's the likelihood of that worst case scenario? You might find it might not be as bad as you kind of anticipated and perceived in your mind when you start challenging those thoughts and those ideas. With that in mind, I think even thinking about just how we can practice self-care is really important. And this is applicable to anyone, not just those who are struggling with mental health challenges during Ramadan. I think all of us can benefit from self-care. And as I said, Ramadan really does in some ways encourage us to practice that. In a lot of unintentional ways, we inadvertently start to practice self-care without realizing it. And so, one thing at the most practical level that we can do, because this is a time where there's a lot of shifting in our day-to-day life and our schedules, is communicating openly with others. Communication goes a long way. Like I said, Ramadan can bring changes to our daily schedule. Our sleep and our wake times change, our meal times shift. And, as we feel comfortable, we should communicate that to others in our lives so that, they can understand where we may be coming from. So if that means we're working and our jobs might be really demanding, it might mean talking to individuals in your workplace who can, help you in readjusting your work schedule, maybe changing how your meetings are, shifting your start and your end time for the day, changing up your lunch breaks, using that time to pray or to shorten that so you can shorten your overall work day. Same thing with if you're a student, reaching out to professors to let them know that it's Ramadan and like maybe this is a time where you might need some extra accommodations, like extra time to work on assignments and, you know, finding alternative study times as well. And so the thing is that help can be there, but we may not always know that others are able to adjust and help us in, you know, managing some of the challenges during this time unless we communicate it with them. You know, it's hard to, you know, effectively convey that without, you know, bringing it out into the forefront. And I think I've seen a lot of the students that I've worked with really making that step, which I'm really impressed by, where they've really advocated for themselves. They really communicated that. They've really spread the word, and they're seeing a positive impact because of that. And so that's something that we should try to strive for ourselves. If we find that things are getting too hard or we can't manage, then it's okay to reach out for support. It's okay to reach out for help. It's okay to communicate to someone, hey, this is like, you know, not the easiest time. I'm trying to balance a lot of things and see what can be done. Because you need to think about what your needs are, what the needs are of your community and of your family, and what, you know, makes sense for your specific circumstance or situation. And then I think another thing that's important is for us to set goals for ourselves this month as well, too. You know, make a list of things that you want to do this month. I think in a lot of the conversations that I've been having with people in these last few weeks is that there's a lot that you want to do, whether it's spiritually, academically, in terms of your career even. It's a lot that we want to tackle and a lot that we want to accomplish. And so sometimes we need to kind of level our expectations and see what goals are realistic for us to accomplish in this month. You know, ask ourselves, like, what are things that we absolutely want to do during Ramadan or just in the next few weeks in general? And what are some things that maybe could wait until just a little bit later, and see, you know, what can go on the back burner? Because I think, you know, we're always trying to accomplish a lot. We're always on the run. We're always trying to manage multiple things. I think as New Yorkers, a lot of us are constantly running around. We have so much to do, somewhere to be. We're constantly running late for something. So, you know, trying to take a step back and think about what are our priorities, what do we want to focus on, and what are those goals we want to tackle, can help us with that. And so part of like setting those goals for ourselves, whether it's related to how spiritual we want to be this month, or, you know, how we want to connect with others in our community or with our family, or how we want to maintain that. Part of that is, you know, practicing SMART goals. I'm sure some of you have heard that term a bit, where, you know, our goals, when we try to set that for ourselves, they need to be specific, they need to be measurable, they need to be achievable, realistic, and time-based. Meaning, if, you know, my goal for this Ramadan is to spend more time with my family and, you know, feel more connected with them, I need to be more specific about that. Like, how do I like make that goal more clearly defined? Maybe for me that means doing iftar with them, like on the regular. And then we want to make that measurable. How can we make sure that we're meeting that goal? So if maybe for them, maybe that means doing it with them once or twice a week. And then is that achievable? You have to ask yourselves, are we giving ourselves realistic expectations, or are we setting ourselves up for a situation where we might not be as successful? Because, you know, we're always striving to do so much, but sometimes like being realistic and leveling our expectations can be helpful too. Because if we're able to accomplish our goals and meet them, then that gives us a sense of fulfillment. But if we find that we set expectations for us that are beyond what's reasonable or manageable for us, then it can cause the opposite feeling. Then we end up feeling overwhelmed. We might feel hard on ourselves. We might get a little down on our luck. And so being mindful of what's doable for us is really important. And then being time-based, thinking about the time frame in which you want to get all of this done. And so, you know, keep these things in mind. So if your goal is to read more Quran, do more lectures during this month, just take care of your mind and your body and prioritize like self-care. Think about how you can do that. Think about what that specific goal is. Try to define it for yourself and really clearly outline like what those steps would entail and whether that's something that you think you can reasonably achieve. And what you find is that as you organize yourself that way, it allows us to walk away from a lot of situations feeling more accomplished and, you know, almost more fulfilled as well. So, you know, these are all things that are important to keep in mind. Other ways that we can practice self-care during this month is even just meditation and prayer. As I've mentioned, it's an activity that, not only is something that we really stress and try to strive for during this month, but it really enables us to stay calm and grounded. It helps us to better cope with emotions as well. As I said, it's a very mindful experience. And, what we find is that sometimes even prayer and putting our faith in Allah can be really helpful. Sometimes we feel like life is out of our control. There's a lot in life that we can't control, and that can cause us a lot of anxiety and a lot of distress. And, if we realistically look at it, we can control our own thoughts, our own feelings, and our own actions in a situation. We can't control other people as much as we want to, as much as we want to change certain circumstances. It might be beyond our own means and our power. And so it's helpful to look to a higher being sometimes in those moments, like, okay, it's out of my hands, it's in the hands of Allah, and whatever will happen will work out for the best, inshallah. And sometimes putting that faith in something else, something that's out of your control, can help feel those unmanageable circumstances feel a little bit, it helps you feel a little bit more grounded in those situations. But even as I said, like, sometimes we can focus on what we can do to control it. And so part of that is our behaviors, and part of that could be our, the level at which we want to practice prayer and the law and all of that. And then taking time to reflect too. Simply reflecting on our thoughts and meditating, finding a space to unload, think about the things that we've accomplished this month, the things that we strive to be, what we want to do. Those are all helpful ways for us to get a sense of clarity and energy as well too. And I think this goes hand in hand with practicing gratitude too. Like I said, trying to maintain a journal or some sort of way of just keeping track of the things that we're grateful for, the things that we have accomplished, the goals that we have managed to accomplish during this Ramadan, compared to, what we want to do in the next day. And as we go through on a day-by-day basis, we can reflect on the things that we've been able to accomplish, the things that we do have that we're grateful for. And as we add to this list, it's something for us to come back to later. You find that, during those times of hardship where maybe you're not feeling your best, or you're not really thinking, you're in the most positive light, you're feeling really anxious, you're feeling really down, looking back at these lists that you've made where you reflect on the things that you're grateful for, the things that are going well for you, the things that you've accomplished, it can be helpful to look at that, because then we're able to see what we think about ourselves and what we've been able to do when we were in, a more grounded state. Because when we are feeling really anxious or really negative, we tend to be our own worst critics. And that can, add to those negative emotions. So seeing what we've said about ourselves in that positive state, in that positive mindset, can help in re-empowering us and being able to see ourselves in that different perspective that we might sometimes struggle to do independently. And even paying attention to your internal thoughts and your dialogue too. I think during Ramadan, withdrawing from food and water, some people might get a little hangry. We find that we might be a little bit more irritable, or things might bother us more, or things make us feel a little bit more on edge. And so, and being more mindful and aware of the thoughts that are coming into our mind in those moments when we're not feeling our best, when we're not feeling good, can be helpful. Noticing, okay, these are the negative thoughts I'm having. How can I reframe them? How can I think about things in a more positive light? It can take some practice to switch those negative thoughts into positive ones, into more constructive, optimistic ones. But you might find that as you're catching those negative thoughts, you'll see the impact that it's having on your mental health. Like I said, when we struggle with our mental health, when we're feeling really down or having a hard time, we see things during a negative lens. We start to think, things aren't really working out for me. Nothing ever goes right for me. Why are things always harder for me? And so as we catch that language, we need to work on trying to challenge it. So, for example, if you find yourself always thinking about the worst case scenario, thinking going into a new situation and then thinking about all the things that could go horribly wrong, maybe that's where you stop yourself. You're like, okay, maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm catastrophizing here. So let me try to challenge that thought. How likely is it to happen that this worst case scenario will actually come through? And would that be so bad? You know, so like, for example, maybe you're trying to seek out some community and you come here to the IC, and it might feel really anxiety inducing, really scary. And you're thinking, okay, I'm gonna come here and no one's going to talk to me and I'm just gonna be sitting by myself, and it's gonna feel really lonely. And so that's causing us a lot of anxiety, a lot of distress, and that can hold us back. So then you maybe ask yourself, okay, if I do this, how likely is it that this is going to happen? What steps can I take to maybe reduce the likelihood of that happening? And you know, if that does end up happening, even if I think there's like a 15% chance of this happening, would it be as bad as I'm thinking about, like as bad as I'm imagining it in my head, if it actually pans out that way? And you might find that the answers that you're giving yourself might help in alleviating some of that distress that you're feeling. Same thing with it. Sometimes we find ourselves making assumptions about others, you know, maybe thinking, you know, oh, no one ever likes me. Everyone thinks, you know, I'm unlikable or weird and no one wants to be my friend. And when you find that you're, you know, making those assumptions, we don't know what people think. We're not mind readers. And so that's where we might need to challenge some of those thoughts by thinking, okay, what evidence am I seeing for this thought being true? And what evidence am I seeing for this thought not being true? And you might find that there's more evidence against that negative thought, and that might help in also alleviating that distress. And so, you know, even sometimes we might find ourselves generalizing our thoughts to broader situations, you know, making always or never statements like these bad things always happen to me, or things never work out for me. And in those moments, we could challenge those thoughts by thinking about, you know, what are the exceptions to those statements? When was a time when something did work out or something did come out in my favor? And as we continue to, like, you know, practice our self-care, I think a really big thing is not beyond like our cognitive health and how we're mentally perceiving things, but also physically. It's important for us to listen to our bodies too. You know, fasting can bring out a lot of changes in our energy levels. And for some of us, maybe that means taking more moments of rest, maybe readjusting our sleep schedules. Maybe we find that, you know, we're not as productive as we want to be in the evening. So maybe we're going to go to sleep really early, wake up at somewhere, and then start our days and accomplish the things that we wanted to do. You might find that, you know, establishing that new sleep routine might help with alleviating some of, you know, the exhaustion that we're feeling, or even finding times to take power naps during your day or in your schedule. Even exercise can go a long way. I think, you know, a common misconception is that during Ramadan, we shouldn't exercise at all because we need to conserve our energy during this period. But, you know, light exercise can also go a long way. You know, the weather was beautiful earlier today, not so much now, but going out for like a walk, getting some sunlight, being able to, you know, do some movement can actually be energizing and like can really boost our mood too. So that some of, you know, the irritability that we might be feeling from the fasting or other emotions that might be coming our way, it might be alleviated by getting some of that exercise, because it reduces releases endorphins, and endorphins, you know, boost our mood. And so, you know, I think with that, the last thing that we can do to practice our self-care, as well as look out for others, is just be mindful of our actions. You know, think about being more patient, more kind, more considerate, more forgiving towards others. As I said, there are individuals who might be struggling in some ways this month, more so than others. And so we need to be mindful of that. We may not know other circumstances, others may not disclose to us that they're struggling, but it's helpful for us to be sensitive and mindful and think about how we're carrying ourselves as well. So as we get closer to Iftar, I think the things that I just really want to leave you with is that, you know, Ramadan, as I said, is a very spiritual time, but it can be really beneficial for our mental health. It can really help us reflect and think about things in a new light that we may not have considered otherwise. I think it brings a lot of things into perspective. And as we do that, we want to be mindful of, you know, the other people in our lives and how we can be supportive to them in a way in which, you know, they can feel more connected to their community. And then there are a lot of steps, as I said, that we can practice to to maintain or even boost our mental health during this time. So, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or if you want to come approach me individually and ask questions, we can do that as well. But I appreciate you all coming here and gathering. It's great to see such a huge turnout, alhamdulillah. For those of you who are NYU students, as I mentioned, I'm one of the clinical psychologists with the Islamic Center. I'm always available as a resource, as a support, whether it's for counseling, navigating life stressors. So always, you're welcome to reach out to me via email, or you're welcome to come and talk too.